If you only knew the power of the dark side.
2, 1, 0.
Hello guys, and welcome along, and thank you so much for joining us today at Play Expo. I have two wonderful people here with me today. I have Andy Sinden, who is creator of the Sinden Lightgun, and I also have David Haywood, who is a Mame legend. And that is the way I'm going to refer to him. Look at that. A round of applause already.
Mame developer, a legend is.
Legendary Mame. It's all in the marketing. I already tweeted that you're a legend. Don't make me have oversold you. The hair is legendary, so we're starting off.
I did redo it before I came out yesterday. Last night.
It's all the same. Yeah, at this point. After 2020, times, days, things, none of it matters. We're here, it's probably now, the crowds are probably real, so it's all good.
I do like it when people have bright, colourful hair and are easy to recognise, so I think I just sort of go with that myself. But anyway, I don't get here to talk about my hair.
But it is fabulous hair. Can we get a round of applause for his hair? I feel like we should have dyed your hair. I'm very sorry.
Sorry, I missed that memo. I didn't get that
Yeah.
one.
Anybody have a wig?
And that was slightly too close to my face. So, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking to these guys about things including Mame emulation and game preservation, and of course the awesome Sinden Lightgun and how that works in conjunction with those as well. Near the end, we are going to give you guys 15 minutes to ask questions, so do start thinking of those through the panel, and then we will pass a microphone round for you guys to ask. To start with, though, in case these lovely people are not aware of who you guys are, could we get you to say a little bit about what it is you do?
So hi everybody, so my name's Andy Sinden. So I, 3.5 years ago, I got a little bit fed up that Lightgun games seem to have completely disappeared off the surface of the planet, and being a bit of a nerd, had a few ideas of how one could work and decided to give it a go. And to my disbelief, it actually worked really well. I was really pleased with it, and I thought, well, fantastic, I'll try to make a business of this, and it's taken like I say, 3.5 years to build it up, but basically we sell those light guns all around the world, have lots of people that use them, lots of happy customers, and they go hand in hand with all the emulation things, because especially Mame, able to run all those great games. My favourite's Time Crisis. There's you can play that in the main hall. We've got that going. Works really well, and basically the plan with the business is to get a light gun for modern TVs. With modern consoles, so that's the plan, and bring the games back. So that's the long-term goal.
I'm David, and I've been working on Mame for probably over 20 years now. I think I started in about 1999. So I've done the emulation of loads of different things, and preservation and things like that are important to me. Making sure these games aren't lost to time. And Andy's involved with the guns and things like that. And that's one of the areas where, because of the CRTs transitioning to the modern screens, there's a real danger with that emulation of that type of thing being lost. And so, generally, that's what interests me, and it's kept me going. It's given me something to do for a long, long time now. And there's no real sign of it slowing down or me running out of things to do. It's sort of the workload just keeps going up and up and up as I sort of think of other things I'll try and look at and try and get into, and then they're all rabbit holes. I've gone down many, many rabbit holes is probably the best way of describing what I've done with Mame over the years. So, okay.
Yeah, so both of you guys, of course, are very concerned with game preservation and keeping sort of retro games alive. For me, light gun games were an integral part of my childhood. The fact you could shoot your television screen. I mean, it was cool enough when you could move the blob, okay? You could move a square, and you could hit it with the other square. Then you could shoot the square. Then you could shoot the square with a gun. Like that is, that is vaguely threateningly holding my fingers at the camera there. My apologies. They're not loaded. And it was just such a massive part of my childhood, being able to do that. It was revolutionary that we had these light guns. And because that technology relied entirely on the television capabilities at the time. Without CRT, they obviously don't work at all. When those stopped being a thing, it really changed the way I experienced gaming. It meant that that kind of arcade-style experience that I had playing Operation Wolf on the Master System, that was sort of something I couldn't do anymore. And CRTs, obviously, they have a lifespan. They're also quite popular at the moment. I hear this retro gaming thing's kind of taken off, and they're getting more expensive, and they require maintenance. And the idea that we can preserve all the games and we can have a gun that we can use for them is something that I think that has been needed for quite a long time. So you were driven by the idea that you also missed these games. Did you expect this to take off the way it has?
So firstly, I thought that if I managed to make this work, that all the big consoles would sort of call me up within a few weeks to work on a light gun. That hasn't happened, unfortunately. So I've gone a slightly different route, which is sort of selling a retro product. And the idea is to kind of build that up and sort of get the right attention to get noticed by the big consoles and get it properly back on them.
Yeah, and I'm quite surprised that people weren't reaching out to you for more modern things, because of course we have things like VR are still, I would say, still early adopter kind of level. The technology is very varied. There's some barriers to entry, although that's getting less with the sort of standalone units. But even then, we want peripherals we can hold rather than just holding the VR controllers. So even if they're thinking, oh, these kind of peripherals aren't necessarily that useful now, things are going to move to VR, it's still useful to have said peripherals. It's still useful to have those for other things, I think. So I'm really surprised by that. However, retro gaming is where that nostalgia started from. So I guess it makes sense that you've sort of gone back to your roots
Yes.
and made it your life's mission that we can all play Time Crisis again.
Yeah. I mean, what I was told is basically the Japanese companies, they like doing things their own way. So they like building their own things using that. They don't sort of necessarily go around acquiring technology. So I think that's kind of ruled 2/3 of them out. And it's basically Microsoft. I think I need to go to their headquarters and sort of camp in the reception with a TV or something.
Maybe not with the gun on you.
No, I'm a bit worried about that. Although everyone just carries them around in America anyway, so it's probably okay.
I was wondering if that might be one of the reasons, because gun games got quite a bad reputation. Even Nintendo were trying to make things like Super Scope not look like a real gun. And so they might be, do we want to be putting these things in the hands of kids these days? But I mean, it's a shame, because like you, I have many good memories of things like Duck Hunt. I had guns on the Spectrum. The games were really simple, but I still enjoyed it. A lot of the time, I would just put the thing against the screen because it was that inaccurate.
Cheating. How many people cheated with their light guns and held them right up to the screen? Go on, how many people? I didn't. Yeah, we've got some honest people here and a lot of people who are pretending.
In the arcades, we've still seen a lot of gun games. Even a lot of the new games are gun games. I mean, I think they're mostly fake analog type controllers. A lot of the ones back in the day were as well, which was, again, a traditional problem with some of the light guns you could get. They didn't really work in the same way. And people were, why doesn't this thing that actually used an analog stick work with the gun on the PC and all this stuff? And I guess your guns actually solve that, don't they? They work fine with that, so yeah. But it is a shame that not picked them up. Would be nice to see some more gun controls on the market if you can get the work with Sony.
I think a lot of these shooting games kind of peaked back in the retro days. I think that the fact they were less realistic, I mean, quite frankly, preposterous, a lot of them, and they were just built around being quite fun and silly as well. I think that was something that was quite a draw for me, as well as me pretending I was in some kind of action movie. So can you tell me a little bit about the development of the gun and how you came up with the form factor and those kind of things?
Yeah. Are we okay to show a picture of the really earliest prototype, if we got it there? That one. So you might recognize that. That's actually a Wii shell. So normally you'd put a Nintendo Wii controller at the top of that. It enables you to use that as a sort of a pointer thing, but it doesn't give you line of sight accuracy. But anyway, I used that shell. I put a camera at the front, wired it through. I put some buttons on the back. Those 2 black buttons were added by me. And that enabled me, that was sort of the hardware I needed to get started. I hooked the trigger up as well to a button. And basically with that, the video feeding into my software, I was then able to experiment and basically get it working. So, it kind of took about 3 months to get it working. And then it's kind of taken another 3 years to get it working as well as it has. So it's an ongoing process all the time.
Are you looking at developing more versions of this? Are there versions that are going to be coming out?
The priority is actually compatibility at the moment. So it's to get it working on more systems, so things like Android, the Mr. console, original consoles as well. So at the moment you can use it on a PS1 and a PS2, but you have to use a Raspberry Pi in between. So future compatibility is to have like a box that just makes it work. So you could play Duck Hunt on the NES, you could play something on PS2 or something like that and use all the different consoles. So that's the priority, using the product to have, but trying to make it work on more systems.
Have you found many sort of indie game developers approaching you saying they'd like to make new shooting games?
So someone came up today. I don't think they're here. Are they here? No. I'd hope they'd remember that. But they came up and said they wanted to do something and had a few indie developers that have made games for it because they see it as quite a niche. So it's a good way to sort of make a game that stands out, because obviously there's so many great free games, so many great paid games. It's kind of how do you get noticed? And actually, well, if there's no Lightgun games, it's a good way to do something that's a bit different. So there's been about sort of 10 sort of independent games that are in development for it.
Yeah, so you have a mixture of bringing back our ability to play the games of our youth and also these new games as well. Yeah. And I'm assuming for you, you are, of course, a Mame legend, and a lot of games you want to preserve, they will use different controllers, they will use different input methods.
I mean, not just guns, but we've been doing a lot of work on the plug-and-play consoles recently, and there were so many of those that were specialist controllers. There's a little one with a sort of like a unicycle where you turn the pedals quickly to move it around. It's a bit like Sonic, but more basic. And then you've got all these ones with motion cameras and everything else, and there's a Star Wars one where you wave the lightsaber around, and I have not a clue how to map controls or even hook up the controls to emulate it with the technology at the moment, because it's not quite like an existing camera. It was a specialist thing that was developed back then, and there's other ones where maybe you could use a Kinect or something like that to do it, but yeah, there's all sorts of controllers, not just the guns, but the guns are obviously a big part of the arcade. So having a gun controller that works with a PC, a gun controller that works with other platforms people might be wanting to use Mame on is important. I mean, you were saying you were looking at, I mean, Mister's not really Mame, but again, people are going to be wanting to play gun games on Mister. It's coming up to Halloween. There are quite a lot of spooky zombie shooters, or the horror things like Chiller, and people want to play those around Halloween, and they're gun games. The best experience with a gun. Using a mouse, you lose a lot of the challenge. At least for me, it's like just click, 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 click. It's not the same. You're not aiming, and people have been saying with your guns, the recoil thing makes a big difference. It's like a 10 times better product with the recoil, because you get that really solid feel from it, and there's a lot of that. And I think that with Mame, we've still got to build some of those outputs into it, because a lot of the drivers don't actually output the signals for recoil and things like that, or sometimes automatic just built into the guns, because some of the guns did have their own firmwares that handle that. There's all sorts of different techs, especially when it comes to the arcades, and as you're saying, people want to do things their own way, and that was the same in the arcades. Every manufacturer did their own guns their own way, and I think if you ask people who repair the things and everything else, like, you need to get the guns for these machines, these ones might work, these ones don't, and it's, again, preservation of the original hardware is getting so tricky. You are walking around the arcades there, and quite a lot of them are still having a few problems, and you see the work people have to put in to maintain them all the time, and it's going to get harder and harder. Even just the PCBs, I know a lot of people do the repairs, and they'll have to buy 2 boards to repair 1 board, take a custom off this, and you do have people reproducing customs these days, because some of the research for the FPGA stuff, like the Mister, is going down the route of decapping the graphics customs and reproducing them and working out how they work so they can be reproduced and that type of thing. But yeah, again, I've lost my train of thought now. But yeah,
it's complicated. I think it's the takeaway from there. There are so many things that you're having to take into account.
Yeah.
And when you're deciding what games you're going to preserve and you're going to move into Mame, if there's no way to play it, or there's no satisfactory way to play it without a random strange peripheral in the plug and play 10 amazing games that definitely aren't ripped off from Batman into your television from the Argos catalogue from a tenner, sometimes you've got sort of like all of that work and not necessarily any reward at the other side of it. So people making peripherals that will allow those to work on modern TVs, because we can't all have ginormous CRTs in our house, as I've been told repeatedly. They're expensive and they take up too much room. Yeah, I'd rather just have the CRT. But you do have to kind of take into account that most people will have a flat screen. And that will allow you to then bring those games back to life and add a lot more to your catalogues.
Yeah, I mean, Andy was mentioning that he wants to interface with the original consoles in some cases, but if it is, say, a plug-and-play one where it's all in one unit and it just connects to the TV, your options are more limited there. I think emulation becomes almost your only option at this point because you've not got control of the ports, you've not got anything, it's just got wires that go to a TV, and it's all in one. And there were quite a lot. The later ones did start using actual tracking mechanisms like the Wii, but there's one, I think from 2007, by which point people were starting to get the modern screens, and that's about the last proper, CRT-based one that only was the CRT that we encountered. But that's still quite recent, and it can't have sold many. People would probably bought it and returned it when it said, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. You even see that today. People buy second and Master System and Operation Wolf, like you say, and not realize it doesn't work until they get it home and find it doesn't work. So if they're going to Google a solution, that'd be fantastic for them. But with the plug-and-play ones, I think Mame becomes your only option, and if we can get them done, some of them are really tricky because they're sort of a lot of them are epoxy globs rather than proper ROMs, and it's a messy process. That then I'm not doing the hardware side of dumping it, and then I've got the software side to write and figure out how it's reading the guns and all this stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a remarkable amount of dedication that goes in, especially because you are preserving wonderful classic games of our childhood. You're preserving incredible arcade games, which we either enjoyed all the time or wished we had the quarters and the coins to play every week. You're also preserving the absolute rubbish that we did not want at all, and that we were bought because, it said, like, say not Mega System 5, and it was advertised very cheaply in the local WH Smiths or something. And the fact that the Mame community says, well, we're not going to just preserve what we like, we want to make sure all of this is preserved for history, it's somewhere between extremely wonderful dedication and possible worrying for your health.
Little bit of madness going on. It's like some of these things I've looked at and I have gone, why have I done that? Even some of the arcade games, they're just that bad. It's like no arcade would want to run this game. It shouldn't be there. There's ones we've emulated that I'm absolutely sure shouldn't have even existed. Who thought this was a good idea type of... And I'll sit there and I'll spend days, weeks, sometimes even months emulating, and the end result will be... It tells a story. I think that's the best I can say for some of these. They tell a story. Somebody developed them, and somebody might go to their own kids. It's like, I made a game back then. This was the game back then. I'm really proud of it. And some people are proud of these things, even though they're not very good. Or you'll get people who are fans of them. I mean, everybody might go, this is an awful game. And there might be one person who goes, I remember that game from back in the day. I loved that. I want to play it again. Yeah, we got that with the Magnet system, which is a floppy disk-based system from Spain. And most of the games were rip-offs, and there was one of the rip-offs called War Mission, which tried to pretend it wasn't a rip-off, but it's actually, I think, UPL's Exec Mission, the same sort of layout. But there was somebody for quite a few years asking, does anybody remember this game? Does anybody remember this game? Does anybody remember this game? And eventually, it showed up, and it's just this obscure floppy disk-based platform. And getting proper reads of those disks has been incredibly tricky. Sometimes we'll have 2 discs, 3 discs, and combine different images because they're discs that have been thrown in storage because nobody wanted to play them at the time, except maybe this one arcade. And the funny thing with those is because they're disc-based media, it saves the scores to the disc. So you can see some of the ridiculous high scores people have put into these games. It's like, you must have played that for like 7 hours, and it's awful, but somebody...
It must have been the only thing
Yeah,
you had
maybe
available to play,
yeah.
and therefore is an essential part of that person's childhood.
Yeah.
And it isn't just the sort of the arcade classics that are a huge part of our history. All of those other games, the missteps as much as the wins that make up the history of gaming, because... Yeah.
I mean, I think of it a bit like music, some of it, because sometimes developers work on those games and then they go on to do something else.
Yeah.
And sort of in time, a bit like, say, where someone's music and you see them in like a previous band and you see sort of where their sort of talent and skill evolved, you can actually see their history in the game, and it sort of builds up of how they, put that together and how they evolved and maybe started with something rubbish, or maybe they're like the graphic designer and it's a rubbish game but the graphics are amazing, and it's great to see that, and without them doing all of the rubbish stuff as well, you just wouldn't see that trail through time.
Yeah, well, we have a massive issue with things which is lost media. And one of the other things that I quite like doing as a hobby is watching really, 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 really obscure bad anime. And the kind of stuff that's like, 4 frames per second. And occasionally you'll see a name on the credits and you'll go, hang on a minute. I know that name, and you'll look it up and it will be the first thing somebody ever did. And that is an essential part of that story as much as anything else. And I think that's one of the things that makes this preservation fascinating.
That's relevant to a plug and play that we recently emulated, actually. Somebody kindly sent us a prototype unreleased DreamWorks unit, which has like a Shrek game in and a few other things. And Frank Cifaldi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, noted on the credits that the graphic artist was somebody who'd worked on things like Monkey Island and the like. And he goes, "Is that your work?" And the guys on Twitter go, "Yeah, that was my work." And otherwise, that would have been some of his work that he'd done post Monkey Island. I mean, this is like a unit from 2007, but it would have been lost if this hadn't been kindly sent to us to emulate. And yeah, lost media and things like that is fascinating. And seeing all this art that you weren't aware of from somebody's music work. Sometimes the game can be terrible and the music can be fantastic, so you just want to listen to the music. And we've got a lot of that on the spectrum. Most of the games with like famous soundtracks aren't actually that good, but the art is still there and can be appreciated, ripped and appreciated in other ways too, even outside of the emulation. People make VGM files from them, so you don't have to suffer the terrible games in some cases, but because everything is there, it can be used in different ways and enjoyed in different ways.
Yeah, and they can be experienced in different ways because of the different things that can be taken from them. And for me, things like the peripherals are hugely important for that experience, because the physical experience of playing those games is so vastly different, as you touched upon, with sort of like using a mouse to play those games is completely different than holding a light gun. I'm quite curious, what was it like the first time you actually got the gun to work? Like how did it feel? Did it just transport you back?
Yeah, it was really good, and I was working full time at the time. I actually quit my job about 6 months ago, but at the time I thought, I can make a living from this, and I can actually do something cool. As a software developer before, it wasn't a bad job, but being able to, this is work at the moment. I'm here, I'm working, I'm meeting people out there playing light gun games, and it's work. It's fantastic to move into something that you really enjoy, and that was kind of what that represented when it was working. So as well as sort of putting me back in time, it was also sort of hope for the future, can do something cool and, play all these games. And the inspiration, just to give a story for that, the inspiration was my parents. They contacted me and said, "We found your old Nintendo in the loft," which was a NES with Duck Hunt. And I was like, brilliant. And the first thing I wanted to do was play Duck Hunt. And I'd actually forgotten about the whole light gun thing, because I remember it happening at the time. I remembered afterwards, like, oh yeah, I remember now, because the Wii made us sort of feel like you could carry on playing those games. Priceless. Couldn't believe I found that. Like actually a picture of me. That is me.
You've got the one eye closed. You're there.
Yeah.
You're imagining the target. It's an 8-bit duck.
Yeah, and basically it was like, oh great, I want to play Duck Hunt. I want to show my kids as well. Let's play Duck Hunt. Everyone loves Duck Hunt. And it didn't work. And then when I looked at the solutions, all the solutions were terrible. Even if you could use an infrared solution, but if you moved, it wouldn't be accurate. The cursor would drift. It wasn't the same. And it was kind of like there was such a gap to do it, and I just couldn't believe anybody hadn't done it, and also why the big companies hadn't done it. So I kind of just thought I'd have a mess around, a bit like David does. I just experiment and do something, and sort of did it along the way, and so yeah, I can play Duck Hunt now and show it with my kids as well. Some of the games they don't like. I'm sure, but a lot of people, if you've got kids, you do that. You show them some game that defined your childhood, and they're like, "What is this rubbish? Like, switch it off, Dad. This is rubbish."
This isn't Minecraft.
Yeah. He likes. My son likes playing the Terminator arcade game in Mame. He loves that. That's his favourite.
So it is wonderful to see somebody's passion to play Duck Hunt again turn into an entire fully fledged business, which is, it needed to happen because I very much miss Lightgun games, and I also admire your tenacity to say, yes, I am going to make an entire business out of the fact I wanted to play Duck Hunt again. How did people generally react to that? Was there a lot of favourable reactions, or did some people think that it was...
Right, so everyone thought it was fraudulent, and I don't know whether, I'm sure David knows this story, but there was a big retro gaming product where someone was going to build a retro console, and they just made up electronics inside a plastic shell, and they went to exhibitions and stuff like that. Do you remember the name of it? Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
They're gonna sort of question it. They're gonna not be sure it's not just another scam to try and get money, to try and raise a load of money, then produce nothing and disappear. I mean, even there's even what is the Atari thing as well that people are really annoyed about what's happened with, and there's just been loads of them that.
Yeah, there's always a certain amount of skepticism, and of course, one of the amazing things about the way we can do things now is that anyone can start a Kickstarter and things, but also anyone can start a Kickstarter. So you always have that kind of approach. Did you find once you'd shown people prototypes that they realised you had actually struck gold?
So, I mean, people here might not know, but when I first got it working, I did a Kickstarter and used that Nintendo Wii Remote shell, and basically it failed. And it took me a year to do a proper shell with a proper PCB and almost basically move to manufacturing, have the product ready. And then I went on the Retro Man Cave show, so I'm sure some of you have seen that, and that was the opportunity for people to see someone genuinely using it. Of course, like YouTubers, it's not guaranteed that everything is what they say, but it's clearly a real product. So if you see one review of a product, doesn't necessarily mean it's all that, because who knows whether But Neil's a genuine guy. He said he just had a play with it, he enjoyed it, and basically we did the video, and that sort of gave enough evidence for people to actually back it. And then once it's gone out to the backers, you're fine at that point because everybody's actually using it. So it basically took a year and a half to build up the trust in the product.
Yeah, and I think it's because something that so many of us have thought, why has no one done this? We kind of got to the point which must be, oh, well, I guess it can't be done in a way that is commercially viable, or else someone would have done this. So it is quite difficult to come out with something and say, hey, that thing you figured nobody could actually do in a way that was commercially viable? I've done it. So it does always help, I guess, to have somewhere to put that helps with, especially if it's your first kind of major product, that helps with that credibility, like going on RMC. The RMC video is the first time that I saw it, and I was just like, this is amazing. I need this immediately. And I was just like, it's incredible to see it actually getting made, and now it's out there, and people are using it. Do you have more plans to evolve, bringing out a range of them soon, or
no? I mean,
just
like I said sort of earlier, it is that compatibility. So it's kind of like the people that have it, that they know I'm sort of working to develop that model. But obviously, if there was like a system where it wouldn't work with that current hardware and I needed something, that would evolve, because the aim is to get everything to work.
You could potentially add sort of boxes that would communicate between it and more things, then people could buy the ones they needed to add to their systems, and you've got kind of a lot of range to expand. I should say scope to expand. That's much more relevant terminology to kind of expand it there, which is really, really lovely to see. Yeah. Should we start taking some questions, I think, from you guys in the audience? If you start waving your hands in the air like you just don't care, and we will bring round a microphone to you guys.
David, one for you. You've quite literally been involved in restoring thousands and thousands of games. Is there one particular one you restored that actually stands out for you?
Are you asking if there's one specific game?
One particular game that you were happy to restore? There must be one particular favourite you've got.
I mean, it's probably not one I personally emulated, but one of the happiest things that made me with Mame is seeing the Moon War prototype emulated, which was a prototype of a game that did later get released with the boards printed in Moon War 2. But the original prototype ran on the Frenzy Berserk-style hardware with loads of speech and stuff like that, and is really fancy. And I think in terms of that story is one of my favorite, because the soundboard was found in one country, and the main board was found in another country, and it's the only copy of that game we've ever found, split apart. Clearly the same, from two parts that have been split apart. And now, because of Mame, you can run it, you can see what it would have been. And nobody's losing any money from that, because it was a prototype. And it's kind of just a nice little story of something that should have been, that wasn't, that got cancelled for probably because it looked a bit too old. And it's a feel-good story. I wish I'd been more active in doing the emulation of that one, but it's something that I was there and talking to the people who were doing it, and so I felt like I was a bit of a part of that, even though it wasn't one I specifically emulated. But in general, there's just so many one-off, quirky, interesting games outside of that I have. I mean, if we look at, I really enjoyed emulating the Psycho systems and things like Strikers 1945 too. I mean, I really like that shoot 'em up, Dragon Blaze on the same platform. It's what you learn from doing it as well sometimes. It's not always the games sometimes. I wanted to ask Andy that actually. Do you think you've learned anything about the games while you're doing this, or just the hardware?
Loads. So I dabbled in emulation, but basically now I know everything about light gun games and running them and obscure prototypes. There's a few. It is great when you get a prototype that's not released and you get it working. That's great, because it's not just lost for 30 years. It's like almost never existed. So I love those stories as well.
Hi. I'm just interested in the with the light gun and how the method that you're using to detect the position on the screen. How different is that to like modern arcade light gun games?
Could we show a picture with the border on? Yeah, brilliant. So how the Sinden light gun works is basically you draw a white border around the screen. It doesn't need to be as big as this. As just sort of this is to illustrate the border. It can be quite thin. Actually, can you show the previous one as well? So it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be something the gun can pick up. And basically, it draws the border around the screen. We have a video camera in the light gun. It takes a picture. It works out where the border is on the screen using image recognition, because it's a rectangle, it's white, those kind of things. And then we work out where you're pointing. So the modern arcade, they work a bit more like a Wii remote, and they have more and more sensors around the screen. That would be way too much to have around your TV at home, because people would be even more in trouble with their wives. But a lot of modern arcade games as well, David alluded to this earlier, they use fixed light guns, which are more like joysticks. A recently Transformers game was dumped on an emulator called Techno Parrot, and I played it at home with the Sinden light gun. I thought it was really good. I got the chance to play it in the arcade, and it's just not the same with those light guns or those guns either. And I think the history of those is because you used to use a flash, you used to use the flash on the CRT. If you wanted to have a continuous machine gun, the screen would just be flashing all the time. So that's why they sort of invented those, not because people prefer them to a gun that you're actually free holding. It's because it was the only tech that would allow you to sort of continually move a cursor like in Terminator 2. So they do those now, and again, people think it's sort of a substitute, but if you play a real light gun, you see it's just completely different to that. So that's what most of them use. I think they can take a lot of hit as well. They're really solid, those, and they put a big solenoid in, whereas the other guns, people swing around and they get damaged a lot. Again, I think, David, you spoke about repairing those things. It's an absolute nightmare for people.
So many different parts, everybody used their own thing, and so repairing them is a bit of a nightmare. And arcades have to be big and heavy and tough and durable and not go out of calibration. I guess the sticks just work better like that than most of the other solutions, so they went with that. And you're talking about the flashing. I was, just before I came here the other day, I was trying to improve the emulation of Data East Lock and Loaded. We fixed a bunch of sprite bugs in that. But that's got what you say, it's got a machine gun, and that used real light guns. And when you pick up the automatic machine gun, it's just flashing the screen constantly, and you're thinking, do I even want to stream this? Do I want to do this on a live stream? Because it's going to be flashing the image at people. I'm going to have to put that photosensitivity warning before I stream it. Just be careful with this. And a lot of those old ones were like that. And I think that's why so many of them switched to using, analog joystick type things rather than real light guns. I mean, Data East did too around the same time. They did Dragon Gun and Lock and Loaded on the same hardware. But for some reason, Dragon Gun came first, and then they switched to a proper light gun for Lock and Loaded, which makes no sense whatsoever. But
I should have mentioned as well, I mean, there is a trick you can do, which is you just make the whole screen permanently lit up, and then you don't need it to flash because each frame is already showing, and that's what Terminator 2 on the SNES does. So instead of having a black background, it has like a weird pinky bluey thing. When I first started trying to emulate that, I just couldn't work out why I had such screwy graphics, and it's, yeah, exactly, it doesn't look as good. So it's sort of like even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they were still finding problems with light gun technology. So I mean, that's the cool thing with the new stuff is obviously you do both. You know, you can do a machine gun and you can do a normal shooting.
Cool. We got some more questions? There we go.
Hi, Andy. You mentioned about with the platform holders, so Nintendo and Sony kind of hit a brick wall. Have you not gone to the publishers, so like Namco and obviously traditional bundling of their sort of products for the new gen?
So, I mean, you're right. Namco and Sega would both have the capability to do it. So I've not actually got a relationship with those guys, but I am trying behind the scenes to do some stuff with some publishers and with also with some hardware manufacturing. So I'm kind of working on it. I can't say anything. It's not like there's nothing signed and sealed, but I'm slowly working towards it, basically.
Okay, do you have some more questions? Oh, yeah, we've got one over here. Thank you. I like the way you're taking turns at the far corners just to make him run around.
Making him work. Question for Mamehaze. So you've got like an arcade board, which is like, a bunch of CPUs and capacitors and stuff like that. How do you get the code off that and turn it into something? Like, what's the process?
well, I mean, the code is usually stored in ROM chips, which is what people will put them in a programmer, read them out, desolder them, whatever, read them out. Some of them are soldered, some of them are socketed, and if you're talking about the whole process from that, because once they're a file, the ROM files, if you know what CPU it uses, you can see if it's encrypted, you can try and work out what order the bytes are in, maybe the files need joining together, interleaving in different ways, and then you get you get a basic disassembly of the game, and obviously Mame emulates an absolute ton of CPUs, so you plug it into the CPU core, and then you start looking at where it's writing to memory, where it's reading from. You identify addresses that are probably video related, control related, and you build up that picture. And with the graphics ROMs, most arcades use tile-based graphics. So again, you'll combine the ROMs in a certain way, try and work out how they decode. If it decodes into 8x8 tiles or 16x16 tiles, or if it looks like it's not tile-based, then that'll give you some hints for implementing maybe a sprite system that's not tile-based. Say Sega System 16 boards use their own custom sprites with different widths per line and end markers and things like that. So you look at it and you use your experience. You use what you've known before and try and apply similar principles and see what fits, what doesn't fit. And eventually, maybe it'll start to show something on the screen. And then you can work with that. If it's showing things and the colors are wrong, you maybe work out that you've put the wrong palette format, or you've got your graphic decode wrong and bits are in the wrong order. And it's a case of just building on top of what you worked out already, looking at what's already there sometimes, what somebody else has worked out. I've done a lot of emulation of Korean platforms, and what I found over the years is most of the Korean games, they cloned other people's hardware, so they make some slight changes, maybe give it more colors, change the sound system. But I remember looking at Semicom's Hyper Pac-Man and quickly realizing the addresses it was writing and everything else looked very much like Toplan's Snow Brothers. And it became clear that they'd cloned the hardware, so I could use what people had already done to emulate Snow Brothers to emulate Hyper Pac-Man, implement a different sound system, and got that working. And it turned out that it was a bootleg version we got working, but that told me enough about how the game worked to extract the protection data from the real version, which required running code on the board. So I had to reprogram the board, or somebody else to reprogram the board to get the protection data from the board so we could emulate the originals too. So it's always an ongoing process. It's always a learning process. People kind of take it for granted and think, oh, it's just really easy, but there's a lot that's gone on behind the scenes and a lot of knowledge that's gone into that. And I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it all myself, I think, because I work with Mame. I mainly do the drivers. Other people have done most of the CPU cores, some of the, the emulation framework, the whole timeout system, most of the sound cores. I was trying to do a sound core myself for one of these silly little handhelds, and that's not my area, so it doesn't sound quite right. So I'm hoping somebody else will come along and help with that, because it's a team project as much as anything else. There's so many people involved, and people with specialist knowledge, and a lot of the early stuff I did, especially, was, I'll do one thing, I pass it to somebody else, they'll pass it back, pass it again to somebody else, and eventually we get the games emulated, and over many, many years we refine them until the emulation is up to scratch and something we consider, worthy of a commercial release, maybe.
And I think there is a lot of community aspect with everything to do with the retro community, with things like Mame and with things like, getting the light gun to where it is, working with YouTubers, getting it out there and getting people to see it, is a huge part of what we do. And the fact that everyone within the community will help lift up and support everybody else, I think is a very wonderful thing that we see when we're all brought together by a shared interest. So thank you very much for talking to us today and sharing all your experiences with us. I'm sure people have many questions they would like to come up and talk to you after the panel as well. But thank you again. Can we please get a good round of applause for these guys? Thank you very much, guys. Please continue to talk to these guys out on the show floor and things, and check out the light gun games, and a Sinden light gun in every home by the end of the week.